Here we go. And we are back. Week 3 of our Building an Enterprise Level System with Xero series, webinar number 10 of 14. I hope everyone had a great weekend, a great chance to process the insights from last week's webinars and ready and recharged to learn a huge amount from the webinars that we've got coming up this week. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. We've got a fantastic panel for you. So just a couple of housekeeping points. There's the Q&A. So please do fire any and all questions through on there for our panel to pick up. We're going to run through quick intros in a second. Then we've got our discussion. I'm going to then briefly preview what we've got coming up over the next 3 days. That'll take us to the full half hour, and then we'll have our bonus content of Q&A at the very end. So firstly, for those who've joined any of our webinars yet, well, I mean, firstly, what were you thinking? But then secondly, my name is David Tuck. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Mayday. Our mission is to mend month end, starting with the needs of multi-entity businesses, intercompany recharges, cross-entity bank reconciliation, keeping intercompany loan accounts in balance. I started my career as an accountant, qualifying with Deloitte. Then a succession of startups and SMEs as a finance leader. I twice headed up finance teams using Xero for multi-entity groups. And with this series, really trying to create the resource that I wish I'd had as a Xero using finance leader of how best to scale with Xero as our accounting system for those businesses. I've been an accounting tech entrepreneur for the last decade now. I was previously the founder at Chaser, the accounts receivable solution, and I spent the last couple of years building Mayday with my co-founder Griff and our amazing team. And just to frame this series, so we're for larger Xero users at Mayday. The majority of our customers have in-house finance teams, and we found they kept coming back to 2 questions. Is Xero still the right system for me? And if yes, how long? Indefinitely, or what will the point be that I outgrow it? And the nature of uncertainty is that when we don't know something, it leads us to act earlier. The ERP move is horrible and hectic, as one of our customers described it. It's incredibly expensive, and that's all before 58% of ERP implementations fail. We've got this idea of ERP peace of mind, the peace of mind of knowing that I can scale with Xero into my growth phase. This series is very much against the backdrop of how can we be useful to our target customer? It's not product marketing. It's not about how to build a best-in-class app stack. There's a reason I'm not wearing a Mayday t-shirt for any of these webinars. It's about righting a misconception that it is not possible to grow with Xero into your growth phase as a business. But it's not about overcorrecting and replacing one myth with another. That Xero is this all-singing, all-dancing panacea that can scale with any and all businesses for the remainder of their time. And so, we also touch in this series on when there is the right time to move on from Xero to an ERP. That's quite enough from me. I'm so thrilled to be joined by our fantastic panel today. And so I'm going to hand over to them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our discussion. Sophie, if you could lead us off.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Sophie. I started my career as an accountant as well, training in audit at the National Audit Office in the public sector. My experience in FP&A in tech startups started 10 years ago when I joined Lovecrafts in that first in finance role. There and since, I have designed and redesigned FP&A processes, built and owned models and reporting across seed, Series A and Series B startups.
Amazing. Sophie, so thrilled to have you with us. John, over to you.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Gaunt. By background, I'm a chartered management accountant. I spent 20 years in industry before I decided to take my skills and kind of use them with smaller businesses. But if I look back to industry, a big part of what I did there was planning and forecasting for businesses like Lloyds Banking Group and National Grid. So real big kind of projects, and then almost kind of taking a lot of those skills and applying them to working with smaller businesses. And actually the interesting thing is those skills are very, very applicable across both sizes, large and small.
Amazing. John, brilliant to have you with us. Taimur, if you could bring us home.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Taimur. I'm the founder and CEO of Causal. We are a business planning and forecasting tool for early and growth stage companies. Unlike Sophie and Jonathan, my background is actually not in finance. It's more on sort of the tech side of things. So studied maths at university, worked at a couple of different startups. But through starting Causal now 4 years ago, I've worked with sort of a bunch of our customers pretty closely on the sort of finance side of the house, and so that's kind of my perspective that hopefully we'll be getting into today.
Amazing, such a brilliant panel. So thrilled to have you with us for this discussion. Taimur, I'm gonna boomerang straight back to you, and just at the outset of this discussion, I find it really valuable to make sure we're all aligned in what we're talking about here. Just briefly, from a sort of jobs to be done perspective, what are we talking about when we say plan effectively for every scenario?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think planning, planning looks different for companies of different sizes. If you're a small company, maybe sort of less than 50 people, you might not have any kind of formalized planning process. You probably don't have anyone in the company whose job title is specifically around planning. But whether you like it or not, you actually will be doing planning day to day, month to month, as you make decisions about, hey, should we hire these people or not? And so planning is something that everyone is doing, whether you're doing it very explicitly or very consciously or not. You are doing planning in some sense, and so it's probably a good idea to be more intentional about it. It kind of encompasses pretty much all of the big decisions you're making as a business. I think the kinds of things that are top of mind for companies as they decide which direction to take are things like runway. When are we going to run out of money? Can we afford to make these hires over this next period of time? Will cutting XYZ expenses actually make much of a difference for our bottom line? How long will it take to get to profitability if we price our product in a certain way or a different way? And so planning is basically the way you can try and get an understanding of how these decisions will affect your business and actually which path you want to take. Part of that is, part of that process is having the right data to understand your business and make the right assumptions about, hey, how much do we actually spend on these things on average, or how much can we expect our customers to grow and things like that. So having the right data is really key, and obviously, Xero is a big part of that for businesses. And then the other part is actually having a good model of your business or a good plan at the right level of detail. So not too kind of in the weeds, but also not too high level, which kind of gives you the ability to, for example, run scenarios to see the effects of different decisions you might make, such as hiring or different pricing plans. So looks different for different size companies, but everyone is actually doing planning, whether you're explicit about it with a financial model and scenarios and all this kind of stuff, or whether you're just thinking through things in your head.
David, can I jump in there? The way I liken it to is that you wouldn't get in your car and just drive around aimlessly. You almost like you're going somewhere. So, for example, where am I going? I want to go to Scotland. Well, that's kind of enough, and then you start to plan around it. So, do I have enough petrol? How long is it going to take? Okay, it's going to take longer than 10 hours. Where am I going to sleep? All of those types of scenarios. So, I think that for businesses to almost get in their car and drive around without a plan is almost how I kind of liken it to. If you haven't done a plan of any shape and description, you are literally just getting in your car and driving around aimlessly. You will never know whether you've got there or not, or you will never know, have you got enough petrol? And I think it's something that not enough people plan.
Got it. Amazing. And what comes through really clearly there is the different dimensions to this, right? Like, forecasting, planning is one umbrella term. We've got the long-term budget model. We've got short-term cash flow forecasting. We've also got, what came through with what Taimur was talking about, the sort of the classic finance business partnering, right? In terms of, okay, we're looking to undertake this project, what's the plan and what are the variables within that? Fascinating. That's really great anchor for us to kind of kick off this discussion. Before we kind of move into, what the things you can do around Xero via its API and connected products, I want to first cover with the native functionality that exists in Xero, what can we do well when it comes to, what does it do well when it comes to planning effectively for every scenario? So Sophie, if I can come to you first, and then John, I'll come to you.
Yeah, sure. So Xero is great in that it's really accessible. And one of the things that's really evolved in Xero is their custom reporting. So you can fairly easily, like no code, just drag and drop, change their reports around, particularly the P&L, to make it relevant for your business. So if you use the standard Xero P&L, it's pretty much useless to your management decision making, right? It just lists a load of account codes in alphabetical order. But if you just change them around, group them up, think about the OPEX in the different buckets for your business, you can get a very useful P&L that's then automatically it's real-time generated. You can automatically run it each month and sit down together, look at it. The other key feature of Xero that's useful in an FP&A sense is it does have a budget feature to it. So you can put a budget into Xero. Once it's in there, Xero will then report actual versus budget against it. We're not quite onto limitations yet, but that budget is set by GL account code. So it's quite granular and broken down. It might not necessarily be the way you think about your budget, but it has those two core features, which in a very basic level gives you your actual versus budget reporting and a decent P&L.
Amazing. Really rich, Sophie. Thanks so much for that. John, anything to add in terms of what Xero does well?
No, I think kind of Sophie picks up some really good points there. I think on the chart of accounts, one thing that I would encourage people to do is almost like throw away some of the terminology if you don't agree with it. So for me, it's almost like that bit of it's your chart of accounts and it's for businesses to use on a day-to-day basis. So this is where I would perhaps get into a bit of a kind of a challenge with accountants who are doing your kind of compliance. Forget about them. It's your chart of accounts for you to run your business and understand the business on a day-to-day point of view. And it's also about helping you to tell the story. So what do I mean by that? It's starting to kind of think about, in the future, we want to do some of these bits. Well, you need to structure your chart of accounts in order to help you to tell that story. So it might be, we're using lots of freelancers at the moment, but one day when we're big enough, we're going to bring one of those people as an employee. Start to structure your chart of accounts to help you to tell those stories.
That's a really important point, John, actually. And I think there's a preconception sometimes that those GL account codes, like the standard chart of accounts that comes with Xero, is the rules, like you have to stick to it. And you totally don't. Like there's no accounting rule that you have to label your account codes in a certain way, and management can relabel those. So yeah, that's a really key thing.
And I think the classic one is sales, like the one code of sales. Well,
yes.
Come on, you probably need to break that down a little bit.
Amazing. And so to flow from that to what are the growing pains when it comes to planning effectively for every scenario that you've seen and experienced when scaling with Xero?
So I guess one of the starting points that a lot of people will kind of struggle with, I think, is around some of the more complex side of things like revenue recognition. So it's almost like that kind of whole bit of I've sold something, it's an annual subscription. How do I spread it? It's a project which is over a period of time. But they are kind of more limitations of accounting as opposed to limitations of Xero. And for me, it's that kind of bit of the reality is I almost see the GL is the starting point of almost like, how do I get quality data out? And then that's the point where I start to kind of plan. So in reality, I think there are very little limitations of Xero, because actually, can I get the data out? Yes. Well, if I've got the data out, I can then start to play around with it in my happy place, which is a spreadsheet.
Amazing. Love it. Can I get the data out? Yes. Therefore, are no limitations. Emphatic. Sophie, anything to add to that in terms of the growing pains that you've experienced, in the roles you've had as a sort of, effectively sort of portfolio FD?
Yeah, I mean, John just said it really succinctly there. If you can get the data out, then you can do what you want with it. And I think one of the, it sounds simple, but one of the great things with Xero is you can just export to G Sheets, right? Now G Sheets then opens up so much more possibility, because in G Sheets you can suddenly work collaboratively, you can share documents with different people, you can import between G Sheets, you can then add on things like Gecon and other tools that we'll talk of later to manipulate the data more smartly. You can use AppScript, you can do your coding. So it kind of becomes limitless from that point, as long as the data up front in Xero is correct. So you've got the two sides of it. You've got to have accuracy in Xero, maintaining it, and that is what Xero is for. It's for maintaining accurate financial data. But then once you get it out, you can do your planning. Xero isn't a planning tool. You need to get it out to use the planning tool with it. So from it kind of makes me feel a bit old, but like you talk about not very long ago, we were all in Excel. And even we were just saying before the call, 18 months ago, G Sheets hadn't quite caught up fully with the power of Excel, but now you can, I know there's still some argument around this more widely, but you can just focus on G Sheets. You can scrap your Excel license if you want to.
Amazing.
Yeah.
David,
please do. I mean, you've used the raised hand emoji, John, which is unprecedented within these series. So you've got the floor.
I thought I'd be polite. I think for me, one of the limitations that perhaps you can't get down to that kind of some of the drivers. So, for example, if we're talking about sales, I can tell my total revenue, but actually what I can't straight off the bat is get, okay, number of clients, average value. You've got to go and dig a little bit deeper, but actually, is it big enough pains? Probably not. It's me just being kind of lazy or thinking back to some of those way bigger systems, but actually I've got workarounds in place for those. I think it's more and more, I like to try and get to the point of what are the drivers behind some of the numbers. And I think that's the bit where you need to dig a little bit deeper and think about forecasting from a slightly different perspective.
Lovely. And then, so we talked there about, what you can do in Xero, those needs of kind of more, more complex planning for every scenario as you grow. Just to touch on it briefly, and I think I know the answer to this, given that can I get the data out of Xero? Yes, therefore there are no kind of insurmountable pains. But anything from a plan effectively for every scenario perspective that means, okay, it's clear that a business is done with Xero and needs to move to an ERP system.
No, for me, I think part of it is there's a real question mark here around actually what level of granularity of data needs to sit within Xero and what can sit in systems outside of it. So, for example, if I've got an e-commerce business, do I need to push every single transaction across, or is Xero there more to help me kind of keep score in terms of what was the total level of sales? So if I think back to when I worked in a bike shop 35 years ago, then at the end of every day, we ran a Z report from the till, and that was what was put into the accounting system at the time. You didn't need every single transaction. And so I think that there is this kind of desire to be just pushing too much data around, whereas in reality, what you need in your ledger can be relatively lightweight. I need to know what the level of sales were, what costs, who I owe money to. I don't need the granularity, because actually there's systems that are better at lifting and shifting than Xero.
Yeah, that's right. And then to your question, David, about limitations, Xero does have some soft, like volume level limitations. So if you were e-commerce pushing every transaction, you probably reach those fairly quickly. So actually keeping the data in a second system with them reconciled solves that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's been one thing that's come through really clearly across this series is think laterally, think pragmatically about those transaction limits. A, their guidelines, and B, are there ways of consolidating your data and only pushing certain data in that means that you can circumvent those restrictions. I'm really keen now to get into the kind of how Xero plus the ecosystem and its API can help. Sophie, we'd love to come to you first in terms of planning effectively for every scenario. What are some of the stories of what you've been able to do?
Yeah, so I guess looping back in everything we've said so far, in terms of building financial models, so I've built the models in Excel, built models in G Sheets, and I've built models in Causal. And if Taimur wasn't here today, I'd still be advocating for Causal in that respect, that it adds a new level of sophistication that you can't use a spreadsheet for, in my opinion. So like we've said, once you've got the data out of Xero, and you also need data from other sources, like your customer data and other metrics to allow you to, like for your drivers, you can then build your model in the way you want it. And I've used all of those. I've sat down being the master of Excel with 3 co-founders literally stood behind me while I drive the spreadsheet and they look at the outputs and keep saying, no, change that, and then that formula, see the output. That at the time that worked, but now you could do that same thing in G Sheets and they could be live looking at the output of it. Where those situations have always broken down is when you want to do some true scenario modeling. And you can do like base case versus another case in a spreadsheet and in G Sheets, but you end up either having multiple documents or having to change a set of inputs for another and switch it out. And it takes quite some complexity and some financial modeling experience to build that out. Whereas, which I don't have. I don't have the modeling background that John, you have. Mine's much more operational. Whereas then when I've used Causal to do that, you build your model and then you can replicate it, but without having loads of models. It's there within the platform, and you can test different scenarios and view them side by side. And that's just a capability that I can't build myself in a G Sheet. And so that's really opened up opportunity there, and it's collaborative as well. So you can be working on it in tandem. So for me, it's usually working with a founder and discussing it live on a call, both being in the Causal model, altering it and agreeing, basically looking at the charts and seeing what shape you want to agree on.
Amazing. John, over to you.
So I guess my happy place for kind of modeling would be a spreadsheet, and more specifically, it would be a Google sheet. And I think for me, the big moment where I've kind of invested more and more time in and kind of believe that it's a great way of doing it is by standardization approach. So we use something called the FAST standard to kind of build our models. What it means is that actually we've got consistency, and I'll stick a link to the standard in the chat. And what it basically means is that every single model that we build looks the same. So for example, the date is always in the same column. So it's there to try and eliminate mistakes, errors, the simple things like the rule of thumb, which says that a formula can't be longer than your thumb. So you either make the font really small, or else you kind of break things down into more and more kind of elements. Now, for us, that's great. I think it gives me that kind of flexibility, but actually it can be a little bit, let me call it fugly, when you try to come and do some reporting, because actually Google Sheets isn't great when it comes to reporting, and like Dave Selleck and what he does in Excel will always be more beautiful than what I could build in a Google spreadsheet. But what I'm constantly trying to do is to understand the drivers. So what we try and do is we try and kind of move away from, you want to take last year's revenue and add 10-20% to it, and it's more the breakdown of, okay, so what are the drivers behind that? So number of customers, okay, what are you looking to do around the average value per customer? What are you looking to do expansion? That for me is almost like where you can really bring it to life and get the buy-in of the business owner or the founders, is understanding that whole kind of piece and bringing it to life.
Yeah, and I like that point, John, that's actually that piece isn't done by the software. No. You have to have a conversation, and you have to understand the business, and you have to effectively write out the narrative of it first and then translate it into formulas or into your spreadsheet.
Yeah, and this is kind of where we start a lot of the kind of conversations of people go, I'm not very good at finances. And it's almost like, okay, tell me the story. So write down the story of what you think is going to happen. And then we'll kind of go through that. And if you've got that story right, it then becomes very easy to model something. And it's very easy to model it no matter what the system is. You're starting to then almost add some more dimensions to it of almost like, well, okay, tell me the time difference between you having that first conversation with a customer and them signing up. Okay, tell me about the type of customer you've got, which will help to define some of that. So a large corporate has got a far longer buying cycle than a B2C customer. So it's getting people to really kind of think, and you need to do that thinking outside of a spreadsheet or a model like Causal.
Amazing. And on the Causal front, Taimur, I'm really keen to come to you. You have the unique perspective of working with all of your customers, using you on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Would love to hear from you. What are some of the things you've been able to see them achieve with Xero plus yourselves?
Yeah, for sure. I can chat a little bit about that. I think so just for some context, we have probably 2/3 of our customers are what we'd call SMBs, so typically under 100 people. They often have at least one full-time finance hire. They might not have, so it might still be the CEO or operations person doing that kind of work. And then maybe 1/3 of our customers are bigger companies. They've definitely got a full-time finance team. They might even have someone whose role it is to run planning or FP&A. And so we've kind of seen definitely a bit of a spectrum. I think the reasons why people start to explore Causal and the other tools as well alongside us are typically around automating some of the manual processes involved in pulling data from something like Xero or whatever their ERP system is. And I think where it's there's sort of extensions for Google Sheets and stuff that can do it for you. I think where a real turning point for people is if they have multiple entities. Being able to pull in the GL from each entity separately, and then consolidate them into kind of a single model or a single report, and then run all of the typical planning, budget versus actuals off the back of that. That's where things become quite painful in spreadsheets from what we've heard. And so a lot of our customers have multiple different Xero entities that they're combining. Some customers are even mixing ERP systems, so they've got Xero for one entity. They might have some regional accounting system in various countries like Spain and Germany, where there's it's a bit harder for them to use these kind of general systems. And so you can even kind of do that kind of combination. But I think typically the trigger point becomes hey, we're spending like 5, 10, 15 hours a month just pulling in the actuals, rolling the model forwards, running the BVA. Let's now explore if there's a tool that can automate that for us, because maybe then we don't need to hire that extra finance analyst, or maybe we can push that hire out by another 12 months or something.
Amazing. Well, look, we've run so precisely to kind of time here. And it's been such a rich discussion. It's been brilliant, and I've learned a huge amount from it. Just quickly, before I preview what's coming up, I'd love to come to each of you for your top tip when it comes to scaling with Xero. So Taimur, I'll come to you first, and then to John, and then to Sophie.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, this is less Xero specific, but obviously this is biased coming from my perspective. But we always recommend that teams start to think about how they might be able to automate and set up their sort of financial modeling and financial planning processes so that it can scale effectively with the company. And the later you start to do that, the bigger sort of the piece of work is to switch over then from spreadsheets into a more scalable system. So that's my biased view.
Get out ahead of it early. Like it. John, over to you.
I guess mine is understand what your business story is, and then start to think about how you can get the numbers to help you to tell that story.
Amazing. Sophie.
There's so many, right? I'm gonna go with short and sweet. Just love G sheets.
There we go. That was super succinct. So thank you very much, everyone. Right. Just quickly, what have we got coming up over the next 3 days? So tomorrow, we're talking speed up bill processing and make bulk payments with Josh Elster from Yardlink, Emily Deakin from More Growth Accountants, and Joe Lines from Nook. Then on Wednesday, we have Scale Your Approvals with Gabriel Kiesenblatt from The Lost Explorer, Hilary Dyson from Bridge Financials, and Alex Kesselman from Approval Max. And then on Thursday, we have Unlock features for scaling businesses in Xero itself. We've got Steve Jarvis from Manufacture 2030, Heidi Seal from Business Sense, and Alistair Gardner from Xero. So register for any and all of those at the link below. That takes us to time. I've got a couple of great questions that have come through that I'm going to field to our panelists. So the first is, when it comes to sort of running your business forecast, how frequently should you be doing that?
Sorry, running your business on a forecast for reforecasting.
Yeah, reforecasting. How frequently should you be doing that?
I guess there's not a one size fits all answer. As a minimum, I'd be doing it H1 to H2. So set a budget, and then after 6 months, set a reforecast for the second half of the year. If you're scaling quickly or your model's changing faster, then you might need to reforecast sooner. You know, if you're scaling your headcount faster than you expected, or your revenue's growing higher than you expected, and things, you know, your actual versus budget reporting is just kind of nonsense now, it's out of date, then you'd need to reforecast sooner. Or if one of your key metrics is moving in a completely different direction, then you'd reforecast that.
Amazing. Taimur, John, anything to add to that?
No, I think for me, it's like as soon as you know something that's kind of significant, then I would change it. I think it's slightly different. If I go back to Lloyd's days, you could only change it every kind of quarter. But for me, running a kind of small, medium-sized business, it's there to help you navigate. So when something changes and it's significant, I would say you change the forecast.
Amazing.
Yeah, nothing to add from me. I think those are all great answers.
Fantastic. And then, Taimur, a question I'm gonna come to you on first. You know, I appreciate you've got a spectrum of different types of businesses. You know, if we focus more towards the kind of the SME rather than the very, very large enterprises, who should be involved in the planning process in terms of, you know, different teams and individuals?
Yeah, so I think what we typically see and what we kind of recommend is that whoever's leading each function should kind of see it as their job to, like, hey, you know, it's my job to figure out, you know, what our hiring plan looks like for sales or for engineering, whatever it might look like. I think the big sort of trap that people often fall into is thinking that, hey, you know, planning is this like thing for like the finance team, maybe, you know, the CEO, maybe they talk to the board or something. They're going to come down from the mountain with the plan, and then we're going to go away and do it. When actually, I think each team lead should basically feel responsible for what that plan looks like for their team and how that rolls up to the wider company goals.
Yeah, amazing. That's really clear. So sort of each number has an owner, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic. And then finally, there's a really interesting kind of question about like when would you typically see businesses have a dedicated FP&A function?
I can maybe take this first. I think what we typically see is that somewhere between maybe there's actually a surprisingly wide range here in our experience, but somewhere between about like 30 and 100 headcount is where, you know, a dedicated finance person or maybe 1 to 2 finance people will come in. I think we start to see sort of specific FP&A people probably somewhere between the 200 to 300 headcount range for a company. So the finance team as a whole might be, you know, 3 people at that point, and then they might bring in a sort of director of FP&A or head of FP&A, something like that.
Amazing. That's really interesting. So 30 to 100 is when the internal finance team starts to build, and planning will be picked up as a responsibility as kind of part of someone's job description.
Exactly.
And then 200 to 300 is when FP&A gets carved out as a dedicated function.
Yeah, I think there's part of it is like, what's the pace of change within that business? So I always see the FP&A as the ability to be able to kind of forecast something and fail in a spreadsheet or fail in a model. So I think sometimes it's that bit of what's the ambition and the kind of the pace of change in a business that perhaps determines when you have someone who is not necessarily dedicated, but has the skills to be able to model more effectively.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much, everyone who's joined us today for this Plan Effectively for Every Scenario webinar. A huge thanks to our guests of Sophie, John, and Taimur. It's been such a rich discussion. Hugely grateful to you for taking the time to share your insights. And I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. And I look forward to seeing you over the course of the remaining 4 webinars in the series. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Bye.
Thank you.